Two quick housekeeping items before we jump into the show today, folks. The first is that today's episode includes explicit language and covers adult themes, so use discretion if you have children about. And the second is that we're focusing much more on funding the show through listener support this year. So if you like what you hear today, please subscribe on our website, together.show, in any amount that you can afford. Subscribers will have access to goodies like the unedited version of today's interview. So, on to the show. I'm Eric Newton, and this is Together, the podcast where we explore the truth about human relationships. As a divorce lawyer, I saw thousands of couples break up firsthand. These days, I'm not so interested in breaking couples up, nor in keeping them together. I'm interested in what our relationships can teach us about ourselves and the world that we live in. So on this show, we have honest conversations with real people about real relationships. Sex and money. These are perhaps the two most direct access points to our unresolved selves as humans. Now, as you can imagine, I saw the impact of our collective relationships to sex and money manifesting daily in my career as a divorce lawyer. And I still see it now in my career as, well, I don't know what you want to call me, perhaps a relationship archaeologist. So today, we're focusing on sex. It can trigger our deepest challenges, our most hidden selves, the aspects of our personalities that we're the least proud of and the most unconscious about. But it also sparks our greatest highs, our most exalted selves, and can deliver access to an expanded sense of being that is simply unparalleled. Some say sex is the most fundamental reason for everything we do. Now, I think that's a bit too reductionist, but it's pointing in the right direction. Stan Siegel, the noted sex therapist and former editor of Psychology Today, has become famous for articulating the idea that we sexualize our childhood traumas as we mature into adolescence, that we do this in order to manage the pain that we can't fully understand or process as children, that no matter how healthy our childhood may have been, some kind of fear or loss is inevitable, and so we all have demons to face. And he's probably right. But whatever the actual mechanism is at play, it's clear that sex is one of our greatest opportunities for personal growth, if we allow it to be. But it's scary. Sure, sex itself is fun, but we don't like the trauma that it can unearth. We resist fear as humans. We avoid emotional work. And for good reason, we're designed to maintain equilibrium, to avoid harm to the system. That's how we survive. On the other hand, this exploration is where the greatest adventure lies. This is how we can finally truly know ourselves. Why not live fully expressed if it's possible? Our guest today, Jessica Graham, does just that. Jessica has gone deeper in this exploration than just about anyone I've encountered. She's an author, a well-loved meditation teacher, and also a film actor. In her writing and meditation work, Jessica inhabits that space where sexuality and spirituality overlap, and she does so with imminent grace. It's a place most of us are unwilling or possibly unable to look, and guiding us all through that space is her great gift. Now, we dive into this interview just as Jessica is telling me how she managed her own sexual traumas. So if you're easily triggered by conversations of this nature, you might want to take it easy with this episode. That said, there's a lot of value to unpack in this one, and Jessica is a master of the conversation. No matter where any of us stand, we all have something to gain by exploring our sexual nature. So to set the stage, Jessica is reflecting on her parents.
My mom is still living. She's an amazing woman, and my father is dead. They have so much to do with the human that I am and the good parts of who I am, and filled my life with art and beauty and philosophy and just all kinds of amazing things. But they were young, and they both had all kinds of trauma in heavy doses. And I think there was, there were levels of emotional incest, which has actually the same effect on a person. And so I experienced a lot of that, I would say, especially with my dad in some ways, like because as a teenager, we were just buddies. We were drinking buddies. Like at 14, that's when I got kicked out of my house and I sort of bounced around. And then eventually I landed with him and I paid rent. As a kid, I paid rent. My room was the bathroom in the first apartment because it was just a studio. So I had a mattress I put in the tub and I had beer in the linen cabinet, and I lived in the bathroom. And he would leave for weeks at a time for different jobs and stuff. And I would just be there with friends getting drunk. And so he loved it when we would go into a store and people would think I was his young girlfriend, and I basically was his girlfriend. There was never anything sexual that happened, but it was, in all other ways. And so there was that, right, which has an impact. But then when I was 3, I was outside by myself with another friend who was maybe at my age and a bunch of older boys, maybe like 3 or 4 older boys. And one of them said, "Do you dare me to put my penis in your vagina?" And I saw my friend, and I can remember this really clearly. I saw my friend and she was like, and I didn't know what "do you dare me" meant.
Yeah, but she was shaking her head no.
She was trying to let me know that I was supposed to say no, but I didn't understand. I just said yes. And 3-year-old, it's like yes.
Yeah.
And I don't have memory of what happened after that. That's just black. But my mom shared with me at some point in life that those older boys like did something to you, and one day you said that your vagina hurt, and I asked why, and you told me, and I guess my dad went and talked to them or something. I don't know. Like the whole thing's a little odd. I mean, why was I out there by myself? I don't know. You know what I mean? But everyone's doing the best they can. But so I knew that for a long time. I knew that had happened to me, and I never thought of it as a sexual trauma. And then strangely enough, I was in this writing class and I wrote this story about short story about a woman talking to a police officer, and she had just been gang raped. And I don't know where the story came from. I just wrote it, and one of the lines was, "They took turns on me." And I remember writing it and being like, whoa, where did this come from? And I didn't connect it at all. And then I was on retreat, and I was reading a Thomas Metzinger book called The Ego Tunnel, which I highly recommend. And he started talking about lucid waking. And I was launched into a lucid waking state in a really intense way, where I saw the dream really, really clearly. And 2 things happened. Ego death terror arose, and actual trauma fear, like fear of death, arose at the same time, and they got tangled up. And I started having extreme hallucinations and visions of demons and monsters and my flesh being torn apart. And I had a strong out-of-body experience, the version where it feels like someone's over your shoulder. This lasted for 24 hours, and I was on retreat, and so I had to sleep like in a ball, because I knew there were like 1% of me knew this wasn't true, but most of me felt that there were just terrible demons under the bed and in the closet. And so I didn't use any of my mindfulness tools. Instead, I turned on my phone, which you don't do on retreat, and I texted my friend Michael, and I said, "I'm really freaking out." And he texted back, sending you love or whatever. And in the midst of that, I saw like something crazy was going on with my email. And so I was like, okay, I can make a choice to just go into the material world right now with my email and deal with it. I'm on retreat. You don't do that on retreat. I'm going to do it. And that got me to a point where the terror released a bit, because it was incapacitating terror. This is terror like I never experienced before and never experienced after. The next day it continued. I got back to my room at the end of the day, And that's where it was worst, in the room. Out in the world, it was fine in the retreat center. But I got back to my room and I said, all right, I got to deal with this. So I got my chair, put my chair so that my feet were by the bed, like something could come out and grab me, right?
Yeah, good move.
With my back to the closet.
Great move. Great move.
And I said, all right, I'm ready. And at first I began by simply deconstructing the experience of terror,
Yeah.
which you can do. I wasn't willing to do it the night before, but deconstructing the experience of terror. And I realized that what was under the bed was me at 3. And she was looking out. And when she saw that I saw her, she began turning her face inside out and making making herself into a monster.
Uh-huh.
And I just said, I see you, and I understand. You're scared, and you don't want anything to hurt you, and so you're making really scary faces. And she didn't really talk much, but she came out, and she was just, this beautiful little 3-year-old me. And she came and she sat on my lap, and she said, I need to tell you some things. And I just put my arms around her, and she just started telling me about what happened. And I couldn't tell you now what she said. I don't remember, and I don't need to because it's healed. But she just told me, she just told me everything. And one of the things she said is they took turns, which was right out of that. It was just like, that was like a mind-blowing moment at the time. And I just held her and just comforted her until she faded away, and then all that terror faded away too.
Well, first of all, thanks for sharing that. I got chills.
Yeah.
What a beautiful moment to be able to hold your 3-year-old self. Wow. Gosh, that's a privilege, huh?
Oh, God. I got to do it with my 14-year-old self too.
Really?
She didn't let me hold her, but the 14-year-old self was my very first retreat. We were in an overnight retreat. We were meditating all night long, and they gave us candy to help us stay awake. And at some point she just came out, and I didn't yet know. And she grabbed the candy and she said, we're having this. And she's like, and we're going outside. I was like, I didn't know what it was. It was my first retreat. So I was like, what? Who is that? And I just did what she said. And we went outside away from people. It's the middle of the night. And that's the first time I had one of those conversations where this other person is talking, another version of me. And I'm talking with her. I'm not making up here. Some part of me is obviously, but I'm not conscious of it. And she's like, fuck you. She's like, I can't believe the shit you put me through. I can't believe you made me sleep with those guys. I can't believe you made me give those guys head. I can't believe you put me in so many unsafe situations. I mean, she just went on, and I was just like, okay. And I kept saying, I'm so sorry. I just kept saying, I'm sorry. And she just kept just laying it out. She took me to task. It was just like, she was mad. And so I just let her go until she was done. And then this was really creepy because it was done, I thought. And I finished the whole night of meditation. I thought I'd had this really cathartic, beautiful experience with my 14-year-old self. I get back to my room and I look in the mirror. Still is a little bit scary to think about. This was the second most terrified I've been. This look came on my face, and this voice said, you think that was it? That wasn't even close to it. And I was like, oh, fuck. And the voice is like, I'm going to destroy you. And I don't know what self that was. I never heard the voice again, that one. Maybe it'll come back sometime. But it was really just self. It was really just shadow.
Yeah, it was shadow. What I'm curious about is that, and we got to go back to the 3-year-old self too, because that conversation's not done. But now that we're on the new conversation, why was 14-year-old self angry with adult self?
14-year-old self was angry with itself, really. I mean, it was angry with it was angry with witness. It was angry with the witness that now I'm recalling it. That's one of the main things. You just watched That's what she kept saying. You just watched.
Yeah.
Fuck you. You just watched.
And witness.
Am I allowed to say fuck you on here?
And witness was really present in the meditation. That was what was happening, right?
Yes.
Witness was coming to the fore.
Yes.
So that part of you that was unresolved around the trauma that you'd put yourself through, which also was sexual trauma.
Yes. A lot of it. Yeah. I actually think of myself as my worst abuser.
Right.
Yep.
Right. That self got to come out and air its grievances to the witness that was suddenly being present for the first time.
Yeah.
But then there was also you.
There's also me. There was
you.
Yeah. And that was more of like the parent. Like it was a reparenting kind of thing. Like it was like, I got you. I'm never going to do that to you again. That's what I kept saying. I'm never going to do that to you again. That will never happen again. And it hasn't, you know. I don't hurt myself, you know.
Well, okay, that's a segue to something you said with regards to the 3-year-old self, which is that's healed now. What does that mean? And does it apply to the 14-year-old self too?
Well, for one, I don't find myself I don't know how to put that without it sounding kind of... I don't need to replay that pattern anymore.
Which one would it be?
In order to feel safe and okay, I don't need to be around people who have unresolved sexual trauma anymore. I used to need to be around people who had unresolved sexual trauma because I had unresolved sexual trauma. And so on some level, there was some pattern or something being played out there. I don't need to do that anymore. I can now actually help people work through their sexual trauma instead of just being in an unconscious space with them.
Right.
It also, I think it was right around that time I had the sexual awakening. Like it was right around that time when all of that was happening. So it came, the trauma I think was released through the sexual awakening. The sexual awakening was deepened through the release of the trauma. The emotion that came up for me telling the story, it wasn't a heavy, like, sticky thing. It was just, just thinking of her. It's almost joyful. It's almost just like, oh, what a beautiful little creature, So it's like, it's not heavy with,
Yeah, that is, from the outside too, very apparent, as you must know. There's no residual. It doesn't seem like there's any residual pain. There's no residual suffering.
Yeah.
Pain is sort of inevitable, but there's no residual suffering about that. It seems like no weight to it.
Yeah.
And just, it seems like you have a lot of appreciation for that little girl.
I do.
And love and affection, and that she has it. She has some real appreciation for your safety that you provide now.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, right? Because we can talk about no self, and we can talk about like, this is all just story, right? But our currency as human is story, right? And so in order to be human, be in my humanity, I relate with the story.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I only relate with the story, but it's so important for us to be willing to go into it in a personal way. We can't transcend if we don't first go in, because that's just spiritually bypassing.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of that. I did a lot of spiritual bypassing until I really just trained myself not to do it anymore. Yeah. And it took a lot of work to get to that point where I was automatically, and I would say I'm still in the process.
That's a phrase that's pretty common nowadays, and particularly in California, but just in case there are listeners who haven't heard that before, why don't you break out the concept of spiritual bypass?
Sure. I got to this place where I was just like overflowing with light and love, and I was so awake, and everybody wanted what I had, and and there were no problems. And I was like, my family was just like, Jessica, you're amazing now. Like, you're amazing. And it was a lovely place to be. And I'm so glad I got to be there for a couple of years. It was like the best ever. It was so good.
It's a great place.
Right?
Yeah.
That pink cloud. But as things started to surface that were deeper in deeper layers, that started to not be authentic anymore. But because I had become accustomed to and attached to that spiritual self, when something would come up, whether it be jealousy or some like bits of trauma memory or whatever, or even just like irritation with something, it was like, well, there is no self, so that's not real, right? And so I would just like, I would go, and because I was so good at deconstructing, I could deconstruct anything.
Yeah.
You know, and I would just up, okay, it's gone, right? But it wasn't because
The flight was still delayed, and you were still going to miss that important meeting, and you were still pissed off.
yeah, I was just basically pretending that I wasn't.
Yeah.
You know,
and you were
and-
really good at doing that.
And I was very good at it. And here's the thing. It's tricky because 3/4 of the time I really was experiencing equanimity. But then that 1/4 where I wasn't, that was a real trap and a detriment, you know? So,
Yeah, that's a real trap. So that's an interesting trap that gets trickier the more you wake up. You know, anybody who's learned how to be an optimist can do it, you know, as just their identity. Like, oh, I'm cheerful. Everything's fine. There's no problem here. There's no conflict. We're optimists. That's right. And then the deeper an awakening might become, the more true it is, in fact, that these things don't matter. And that we're not attached to them. And that everything is neutral. So then what's the Jedi mind trick to escape that trap?
I can tell you what I did. I mean, well, a couple things. One, have good teachers who can see your bullshit, who you can't bullshit, you know. Have peers and partners who are matching you stride for stride along these psycho-spiritual journeys. They will tell you, you know, you need, outside feedback. That's one thing for sure, because you can really get lost in there, you know. So feedback, peers, teachers. What I did is I just started, the Jedi mind trick was just like, I just started training myself to every day just ask, am I bypassing anything? You know, especially when going through a challenging time. If there was something challenging, I wouldn't necessarily experience it as challenging, but like if on paper it's challenging, then let me check in and see. And when I found that there was something I was holding on to, I would do some writing, I would talk about it, you know. I just did it every day. And so then I realized it had become automatic towards the end of this past year, because something was going on and it was just automatically happening. I was going checking it out, and okay, not bypassing. All right, move on.
Nice. Okay. Okay, so then now your personal history is that you had an awakening experience at some point, and then were teaching meditation yourself. You were invited to teach, I think, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything about that that's worth talking about?
Well, I'll say this: awakening continues.
Yeah.
Right. The idea that there's this one thing that's going to happen, and then you're just done, or there's one thing that's going to happen and then you get to have a solid experience, is a myth, right? Is in my experience. I remember finding that out. You know, I'd had some pretty big awakenings. The paradigm had really shifted, but I still had that seeker who was like, oh, I'm going to get that carrot. I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it. And I remember finding out, and I think I just maybe one day just realized that there was no carrot, you know, and it was devastating because I was like, what have I been doing? Really?
I remember one of the stories that Adya tells is when one of his students suddenly awoke in the middle of song, what do they call it, satsang?
Satsang, yeah.
He looked up at Adya and he said, well, now what am I going to do? You know, his entire identity had been caught up in seeking this moment, which... Right?
Oh man, yeah.
So,
and now I can laugh about it, right? That was what, like, I don't know, 7-8 years ago. And now nothing could be better than to know that it just keeps unfolding.
yeah.
I mean, it's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful thing, and to not know,
Yeah.
to just be in the unknown and the mystery and the just limitless sort of flow of experience.
The warm embrace of adventure.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, you wrote an article for us called How Mindfulness Killed My Sex Life.
It's one of my favorite articles I've ever written.
Really?
Yeah.
I loved that article. So break down the thesis real quick.
Okay, so a self can be deconstructed into thought and emotion. Thought being in the form of auditory thinking, words in the mind, and visual thinking, images in the mind, like a daydream or whatever else. Emotions as in emotional sensations within the body. And so if you sit year after year, or even month after month, it can happen pretty fast, honestly, if you do it in a dedicated way, you start to see that there's this transparent tunnel that you're in of self, made of thought and emotion. And while you're in it, you can't see you're in it. It's like the Matrix. You don't know you're in the Matrix, and then you get unplugged and you find out and you're like, what? So that's one way to talk about awakening, right? And I like to tell my students, like, you get unplugged from the Matrix and you're all skinny and like your muscles are all, what's the word when
atrophied?
Yeah, atrophied, and you have a hole in your head and you're bald and you're like, and it's awful. And I was like, sometimes that's what it's like to wake up.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of crunchy stuff in there. But anyway.
And we don't have any skills to be in that new way.
Right, exactly.
When we first are born into it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So once you start seeing that, once you start seeing, oh, this is what makes a self, and there are endless selves, and they're just coming and going and coming and going, and I'm not one solid thing. Once you see that, you can start to do the same thing, with any experience, right? Depression, anxiety, anything, addiction. You can start to deconstruct and see through those selves. And when you do that, they're not so powerful because you recognize you're not that, right? There's much more that you are than just these small strands of experience. So if you take, for example, the high that you get when you meet someone and you really dig them, and they're the best kisser and their smell just makes you lose your mind, and you're going crazy until you get a text from them, and then you get the text from them and your whole body just like explodes with pleasure, or you don't get the text from them and it feels like you've dropped into the pit of hell and despair and everything sucks and your whole life is over. Like, when you start deconstructing that stuff, that whole experience changes. And so same thing with sex. You start deconstructing what it is, and you can start to have a disillusionment around it. And this has happened to me with many things, and I was holding out on the sex one because I knew what would happen, because it happened to me with so many other things, like lots and lots of everything. Sex was one of the last things and I knew I was holding out. I was like, I want this one.
Yeah, your way of understanding the universe in all of these areas had evaporated because of the underpinning structure of self that was holding them up.
Yep.
Didn't seem real anymore.
Yep.
And when it evaporates, all the pain evaporates, but so does all the pleasure associated with that thing.
Yes.
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
And that's beautiful on one hand. There's a blank canvas that you can do whatever you want, or you can ignore the canvas. But on the other hand, it can be scary, but it's also in a way empty. Mm-hmm. And sex was just so pleasurable for you.
So pleasurable, and so like I loved that me, like that self, just like, just like that wild sexual self. And
so why deconstruct that?
An old lover of mine asked me just that. I was like, guess what I did? And he's like, why the hell would you do that? And he came from like, he was raised within like a kind of a cultish spiritual community. So he knew exactly what I was talking about.
Yeah.
He's like, why would you do that? And I was like, I couldn't help it.
Yeah.
I couldn't help it, And so that's what happened. And I went through this period. So I think the article is like, I went through this period of, a lot, just really low sex drive, just really disillusioned around the whole thing, freaked out by that, depressed around that, like more so than because it was an identity that like I said, I was really holding on to.
Now, hold on.
Yeah.
So that's a thing that might be confusing to people. You'd had awakening after awakening. The layers of illusion had been peeling away for years at this point. You had reached peaks of states of bliss and peace that were unimaginable before awakening. And yet, with the loss of your sexual appetite, you were depressed. How does depression and awakening fit in the same space?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the depression comes up and then you see it for what it is. Doesn't necessarily mean it goes away. Right? Like, I mean, you can be completely heartbroken and devastated. Doesn't mean you have to suffer.
Yeah.
Right? If you can see it for what it is. So, but I'm not going to lie. I mean, even though there's technically no difference, I'd rather be happy than sad. You know what I mean? I'm not going to resist the sadness. I'm going to embrace it fully and see it as beautiful, honestly.
Yeah.
But it feels good to feel good, right? I'm a human being, So, but I knew that it would pass, and I knew that on the other side of it was something amazing, because that's what happened with all the other disillusionment.
And well, were you just consoling yourself by saying that, or could you kind of feel a momentum in your body or something?
No, I just knew it. I mean, that's the thing. For me, a lot of my growing, and it's not the case anymore, but a lot of my sort of psycho-spiritual growth came through pain and suffering and challenges. And I would go through it, and I would come out the other side, and there'd be, shining and new. These layers have peeled back. But I had to really go through the muck. That's not actually how I process anymore. But at this time, there was still some element of that. It wasn't as intense as it used to be, but it was still like, I know what this is. It's like when I went to the hospital last year, I was like, yes, I don't know what's going to happen, but this is awesome, because this means I'm going to grow in some way. And guess what? Self-love, which is the number one thing, really, it really is. It's always, in my experience, it's always coming down to love. It's always coming down to love/acceptance of whatever arises. So whatever self is there, especially those deep, dark ones that we're embarrassed of, or we wish would just, we could meditate away already. Those are the ones that just need love, 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 love. And what happened through dealing with some health issues was I got a whole new level of self-love. I mean, profound. And that's just over this last year. Like, I already loved myself, and I was already not treating myself badly anymore, but there's all these subtle ways And so that self-love came in these like beautiful ways as a result of that experience. So I knew the same thing, and this low sex drive thing was before that, but I knew because I'd just been through it so many times. It wasn't even like a consoling. It wasn't even like, it was just, I knew as soon as I hit, I was like, oh yeah, okay. So there's something that wants to shift.
And then what was it?
Well, I mean, for one, like, no longer congealing around an idea of a solid self who was Jessica Graham, who's loves sex, you know what I mean? Which the more self that falls away, the more free I am, you know? The more I can be with other people without a filter of self, right? Which is I think the best gift you can give anyone. Is to just be able to be with them, not mainline.
I guess I know what you mean. Direct without stuff in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like that was one more layer that fell away that allows me to be closer to you in this moment. So that's huge. But then also, I mean, I started having when that was all over, started having a whole different kind of orgasm, started having like extended orgasm, started experiencing deep levels of relaxation during sex, had a deeper intimacy with my partner, feeling all the sensations in my body like a million times stronger, being one literally with my partner, looking at my partner, seeing myself.
Wow.
You know, the whole world breathing in and out with every breath we took. I mean, I could go on, you know, all the peak states you could imagine in meditation and then some. But not only that, I started having fun, and I wasn't scared anymore I didn't need to be drunk to ask for what I wanted. I could explore, I could laugh. I mean, I had mind-blowing orgasms, but I got to a point where like, it's not about that at all. At all.
Yeah.
I mean, an orgasm is different from climax, right? Like an orgasmic state, I feel like I'm like almost always in an orgasmic state. Not always, but a lot of the time, because it's not about this, like these moments, this like little moment of pleasure. It's about the place from where you're living, right? That's why I'm not interested in the shame. That's why the shame thing just can't apply, because it's like, this is, I am that, you know?
Which sounds extraordinary. And so I wanted to know, how do the rest of us get there? What are the tools and practices that we can all put in place to arrive at the same sort of equilibrium with regards to our own sexuality? And Jessica has a lot of tools for this, which of course she talks about in her book, many of which simply have to do with bringing awareness to our own sexual selves. And so I asked Jessica, what begins to arise? What happens next?
Grief.
Yeah, that is so common, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
But okay, so say more.
Yeah, I mean, and that can be in different levels. It can be, I can't believe I kept this part of myself so shut down for so long. I can't believe I didn't nurture this part of myself. It can also be grief around, a lot of people have had sexual trauma, especially women. But
1 in 4 reported.
Yeah. And so it's like, and a lot of people, like me personally, I didn't even consider myself to be a sexual abuse survivor. Because I was like, oh no, because it's not like this, and this. It's not these things. So it's not, but I was, you know, there was a reason why everybody I dated had been sexually abused. There's a reason why I was matching up with those people. It's because I had been too. I just didn't call what happened to me sexual abuse. Just didn't call it that. And the meditation is what taught me. But a lot of people, when they start bringing mindfulness to sex, are going to have to face the sexual trauma. And that's another reason why people don't do it, because it's so terrifying, and I so understand it. I have so much compassion for not wanting to go into things that are that scary. So what I do a lot of with people is a lot of work on creating a safe container. So when I'm working with someone and I find out that there's sexual trauma there, it's like, or any kind of trauma, it's just, how can we create a really safe container for you to start to explore this material?
Wow, what if they don't have you?
There's lots of wonderful practitioners in the world. It's about finding someone. You can do a lot on your own, but at a certain point, you do need somebody to hold space for you. A lot of my...
Do you mean specifically if there's trauma, or just in general with sexual awakening?
I think specifically with trauma. Mm-hmm. I think it's helpful to have guides, even if you don't have that, that background. I think it's helpful to have people just sort of, like, for me, like, I can contact a teacher and they might just say a few words that just points the sail in a whole different direction. And I'm like, whoa, where am I? This is amazing. Yeah. So I think it's important to have teachers, coaches, guides, therapists, peers as well. But you can do a lot of work on your own. But when it comes to going into sexual trauma, I believe in there just can't be enough support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So what does it mean now it's healed? How do you hold the trauma now, given that it's healed? What is the way to be around trauma now?
Well, one thing is, even though we've used the word a lot today, I don't use that word a lot for myself anymore. I talk about trauma a lot. I'm very passionate about trauma recovery, but I've stopped identifying with trauma as much. Mm-hmm. So I think that really shows that something's healed, because like that was for many years, it was something that I was working through. And so I really identified with it.
And now it's not that you've worked through it, it's that there's no more it.
Yeah, there's not an it.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Another way that I relate to it now is I use it in my teaching.
Right.
It's also part of my story.
Yeah.
It's like that story I shared with you is in the book, because it's important. And I recognize, I recognize and I do identify with that whole wounded healer archetype.
Yeah.
And that's part of what I offer as a teacher and as an author is, I've been in some really dark places and I'm not anymore, and I can share with you what I did. And you can try it and see if it works for you.
Yeah.
Jessica has come back from those dark places. That's clear from the interview. What's hard to convey in audio, but that's imminently clear in person, is that Jessica's presence and composure don't just come from good genes or having lived a charmed life. They're the direct result of deep, ongoing, and intentional work. That kind of peace and presence is available to all of us who are willing to do the work and to look within, but it's never easy to walk that path. And as Jessica's story so clearly illustrates, healing is possible for all of us, but we need the support. And so thank goodness for teachers like Jessica who are here to guide the way. If you've had adverse childhood experiences, I can't stress enough how important it is for you to get that support. Even if you're not entirely sure what happened to you, reach out to someone. There's no harm in learning about yourself or getting any kind of support. Now, there are two excellent resources that Jessica suggests, and you can find both of these immediately on the internet. The first is ACES2HIGH.com. That's ACESTOOHIGH.com. That's the Adverse Childhood Experiences website. And the second is somaticexperiencing.com. That's SOMATIC experiencing.com. And I'll have links to both of those in our show notes. Now, there's a lot more to this interview than a conversation about trauma, but we ran out of time. So I highly suggest listening to the rest of the interview if you can. The full unedited version of the interview is available to supporters of the show at any level, and you can find links to how to support us on our website at together.show. You can find Jessica at her website, which is meditationwithjessica.com. Her forthcoming book, Good Sex, Getting Off Without Checking Out, is now available for pre-order from North Atlantic Books, and it's being distributed by Penguin Random House. And we'll have a link to that on our website and in the show notes as well. Now, if you liked what you heard today, there are two ways that you can support us. The first is leave a review on iTunes. It's more helpful than you can imagine just doing that. The second is become a subscriber. We'd love your support. You'll get bonus content, unedited interviews, early access to some of our episodes, and a community of other listeners. You can find links to all of that on our website at together.show. You can also find us on Instagram and on Twitter at together_show. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/togethershow, or you can email me at host@together.guide. The music in this episode is by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find their website at sessions.blue. That's all for today, folks. See you next week.